Hey everybody, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name's Timo. I'm joined by Tucker, Tanner, and Abram. We here are talking about movies. We are trying to figure out what the best picture of all time is. That is our quest. We are questing to find the bestest of the bestest. That's right. That's the name of the show. That's the name of the pod. And today we're talking about the 1986 movie from Oliver Stone called Platoon. It's about the Vietnam War, made many years after the Vietnam War. This is a familiar topic of films. They like to talk about war, and they really like to talk about this war because it certainly is a war. I will give it that. It's got a heck of a cast. We got Charlie Sheen, Willem Dafoe. It's got Johnny Depp, young Johnny Depp in there. That was really interesting. Forrest Whitaker, Tom Berenger.
Forrest Whitaker.
Yeah.
That was interesting to see.
This is quite the cast in this movie. But first, we've got to do a little recap of what our list looks like before we can dive into what's going on in the movie. So last week we were talking about the 1980 movie Ordinary People from Robert Redford, and we decided that it ended up at number 7. So the list as it stands currently is number 1, Godfather Part 1, Parasite, Gentleman's Agreement, The Hurt Locker, Godfather Part 2 at place number 5, The French Connection, Ordinary People, number 8 is Rain Man, and number 9 is Out of Africa. So that's how our list stands right now. But this week, there will be one more film added to it somewhere. That's the promise. And at the end, stick around. We will be deciding what comes up next with our favorite method, the random number wheel. All right, so that's enough of our logistics. We got to talk about a film here, fellas.
Yeah,
a film.
It's Platoon time.
It's time to get.
That was my favorite
Platoon.
That was my favorite quote when they said
this is all of our first.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Did anyone see this before, or is this totally new?
Ooh.
Fantastic.
Which is gonna be fun. I don't think that's happened yet. Well, Out of Africa certainly happened.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was bad choice on my part.
So,
anywho,
how would I begin?
How do we begin with this movie?
How about this? I watched this movie with my dad, who had seen it before.
Ooh, okay.
Which was very interesting, and I found myself feeling a lot of different ways about Platoon. The number one thing I felt while watching it is that this movie was fucking hard to watch.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen a bunch of different war films, and I don't think any have been affecting in the way that I found Platoon affecting. And for me, it was this uncomfortable under and overtone throughout the entire film that characterized my experience with it. Beyond anything else that it does well or poorly, it was the visceral reaction that the film evokes that I think is most special about it, and what I took away from it.
So, as someone who has seen a solid number of wars, but never particularly connected to any of them in any meaningful way, I realized on a rewatch of Hurt Locker, Card in the Corner, that I realized I really enjoyed that one. Watching this, I was expecting not to take that much out of it, but I ended up really enjoying this. And it's that enjoyment that actually surprised me the most and makes me excited to go back to other war films that I see that I did not necessarily connect with as much. Namely, Apocalypse Now? Yes.
Yes.
That's the other.
Yeah, Apocalypse Now.
That's the other very well-known Vietnam War movie.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. A movie that I had a lot of respect for, but personally don't honestly remember almost anything from. I'm excited to rewatch that with the kind that I finally did enjoy, a war movie, more than I expected.
Yeah, I will agree that I enjoyed this film a lot. It's very horrifying. It's not fun to watch. There are scenes that are very, very difficult. And the depictions of what our country did in Vietnam and other countries surrounding there's a line like, we're not in Vietnam anymore. Like, are we in Cambodia? And they're like, yeah, I don't know. It is really horrifying. It makes me feel, I said Hurt Locker didn't make me feel good about being American, but this makes me feel way worse.
Yep. And that's certainly strongest aspect. Oh, am I gone? Am I back?
No, just repeat
your sound keeps popping in and out.
Interesting. Okay. Any way I can fix that at the moment?
Yes, but keep talking.
Okay, well, I was just gonna say that, as you said, I think this film's strongest aspect, in my opinion, and the power of that it carries is that it shows the American soldiers in a very mixed light, and I think mostly negatively. And the way that they are just powering through everything, and they don't care. A lot of them don't care about the emotions of the opponent, or recognize them as human beings, and it's very dehumanizing and grueling and just negative in general, towards the fact that these people are just fighting for a cause that they most of them don't even necessarily believe is a just cause. And it was very interesting to see that, because I am someone who does not personally believe in a lot of war things. I don't have a lot of pride in my country, to be 100% honest, and especially not when it comes to war. And watching these men do such horrendous things just sort of cemented that in my mind. And I honestly wish I'd seen this before. I'm glad I finally watched it, but this did not help my negative connotation towards war, or even just American soldiers in general.
So, I don't view this movie as anti-American. It's very anti-war, but I think that reading it in an anti-American lens, at least with the baggage I come into it, feels more like a slight to these people who were there and to what the film is trying to accomplish, I think, than what its overall message is. You look at Tom Berenger's character, and he talks about doing things after when Charlie Sheen's like, "We're gonna fucking kill him because he killed Elias. We're gonna kill him." He's like,
Yeah.
I'm operating on how things are, not how they should be." And there is a weird perverted sense of heroism to these characters, and I think the real heart of the film is recognizing that it was they're in a fucked up situation, and it is chaos, and these are good men that were turned to do awful things. And I don't. So read this film in a lot more of a sympathetic lens, not a lens that doesn't excuse what happened in Vietnam by any stretch of the imagination, but one that at least I didn't take away as being anti-American soldiers as much as anti that conflict in general, anti-war as a period and what it did to these guys.
And yeah, I think Abram, that's probably the most fair reading of it, especially since as Timo said, this is made quite a few years after the Vietnam War conflict. But Oliver Stone himself was a soldier in the Vietnam War, so I think that the critique of the Vietnam War and the practices, but also it's a sympathetic look at, for the most part, the people who were corrupted by the just the chaos and the conflict that was made at by a larger group of minds rather than the actual men who fought the war.
Yeah,
Because
you absolutely cannot blame a lot of these individuals for the way they acted, in that there's these cultures in the military, and then the war itself is like none of these guys had any say in whether we were or weren't in Vietnam. They were there to do what was they were told, and when they weren't, as whatever his name is, the Scarface dude says, when guys don't do what they told, the machine breaks down. And
Yeah.
and so I think it's really hard to not cast stuff in a super positive light as a filmmaker, and especially as a war filmmaker. It's hard not to make propaganda. It's hard to be critical about this, especially when sometimes you got to deal with the military and they don't really like it when you do show things that aren't very favorable to them. But in this movie, it definitely, I would agree, Abram, it takes a sympathetic look at this character, at the men in the field. They're so young. That's what I thought.
Well,
As soon as the film opened, I was like, holy crap, Charlie Sheen looks like he's 17. Like, these guys do not look old at all. They look as old as I am. And that was very impactful right off the bat.
yeah, I think. Well, obviously, as we alluded to at the beginning, this cast is just insanely stacked. But
Yeah.
the fact that a lot of them are, and this is something that's happened as the film has aged, the fact that these are recognizable faces that we now see as very young makes that connection in your mind. Like, wow, these soldiers were very young.
Yeah.
And that's for like the fact of that the soldiers themselves may be sympathetic in some way. I mean, Charlie Sheen, Chris Taylor has a line about alluding to that at the beginning of the film when he says that, these guys, they're the grunts, they're the people who do the work. back in America, they were nobodies. They came from towns that nobody's ever heard of, and
Sibley, Iowa.
yeah, like Sibley, Iowa. But yeah, he said some of them don't even have jobs waiting for them back home, but they're here fighting on behalf of their country nonetheless, and that's why there's such a adverse reaction to Charlie Sheen saying, "Oh, like no, I volunteered," and then I think it's Forrest Whitaker has a great line. He's like, because Charlie Sheen's his character, his justification for that is basically, well, no, I think it's unfair that the rich people, they don't have to fight the wars, which is a fair point. But Forrest Whitaker says, well, you have to be rich to have that mindset in the first place.
Yeah. I think that this other film's strongest suit.
Oh,
balance.
Repeat yourself, please.
Sorry, is this better if I move it closer, or is that worse?
Yeah, just don't be so loud. Just don't
I think
scream.
that this film's strongest. I was not fucking screaming.
It's okay.
This film's strongest suit, aside from it showing the horrors of war, is how it manages to balance so many characters with their disparate views and show the conflict between those. Like, as Tanner said, that moment where Charlie Sheen's character tells why he joined the war, like each person has a reason why they're there, the experience that they've brought into it, and their perspectives on war. And sometimes that comes to a head and clashes, like with Willem Dafoe and the actor who played the guy with the scar on his face. Yes, Tom Berenger. And that ends up being another main point in the movie. And it is able to balance the stories of each of these guys. You get the story of Chris Taylor sort of becoming from a green, fresh-faced soldier to he kills people at the end, and he's sort of remorseful about it, but he's had those experiences and realizes why he needs to do it, and he wants to kill the guy because he killed his friend, and there's a whole weaving web of things. But I think on the same line as that, I have to critique the movie. There's just too many characters that they focus on in this film, and I think it becomes obvious near the end that there are characters that have shown up, but I don't know their names, and apparently they have relationships, but they didn't really show those. And when you start getting to the weeds of characters that are just sitting around, of course it's a platoon, it's a lot of guys, but it feels dispersed near the end. And I had such a good time not good time, but I was focused and engaged with the story in the middle segment of it. But nearing the end, I realized, okay, guys have died that I cared about, and now I have to focus on this whole new set of characters. It really took me out of it. And I just wish that they had focused a little more on the characters that they were fleshing out, as opposed to trying to portray the entire platoon.
I think focus is something to hit on, and not to tip my hand a little bit too much, but what I left the film with was this overall visceral feeling and the ways that I really liked its thematic contradictions. But I found a lot of the moment-to-moment beats to not hit or to feel too many. The way that we're trying to juggle things, it's fun to see them hang out at the barracks. It's fun to have all these characters, but at a certain point, they're servicing this larger commentary about the war more than I think the actual plot itself. So I didn't find myself connecting necessarily with a lot of the characters external to the fact that they are in Vietnam and that generating a lot of the conflict and the emotion in itself. Outside of Tom Berenger and Willem Dafoe, I didn't connect really to many of the characters. I didn't even really find Charlie Sheen particularly engaging. Him writing the letters to his grandmother, I don't think sympathized him, and I don't think it served as much more than a kind of flowery way to share exposition. And I don't know. I think that the punch of the film is a lot stronger than its follow through.
Yeah. Yeah, as long as we're getting into some critiques, like I said, I agree with a lot of things that have been said here. I think a lot of the positives that we've brought up they do apply, in my opinion. But there's just something I just didn't get it. I just didn't feel this film. I didn't have the visceral reaction, and it might be because the Vietnam War is a war that's been explored in lots of media, especially films. I mean, you obviously have the greats like Apocalypse Now and Full Metal Jacket. And I just feel like I know it's not, but it just kind of feels like a cheap imitation of the themes and things explored in those films. Like, I get that the war corrupts people. I've seen that portrayed much better in Apocalypse Now. I get like the themes of like the duality of man, which is pretty blatant in Full Metal Jacket, but it's just executed better. And maybe the one thing I can give this film is the pure production value of how it produces those battle scenes. But I just really can't laud it over some other Vietnam War films or war films in general that have just accomplished some of those things better.
I
I
think
Well, Abram, I want to. You said it doesn't have the punch, but it has the punch, but it doesn't have the follow through. And I'm going to connect both of your points here. I think you're
Ooh.
right, but I think that punch is really strong. For me, I really
Yeah.
feel it in those scenes that I want to turn away so bad. I don't want to watch when there are when he shoots the woman in the head in the village. That is
Yeah.
so like, yeah, you see, I think Apocalypse Now is a different movie, and we're not comparing the two movies here, but they're
No.
similar. They're very similar films. And they do deal with different things. I think this is a much more, this is the dudes who are fighting the war, and Apocalypse Now is not quite that same story. And in here, in Platoon, we get to see these like atrocious war crimes. We see war crimes committed by the good guys in this instance. Even when, the nameless, faceless enemy of the NVA throughout the film isn't really portrayed as a superhuman enemy, like as a humanized enemy, the individual, the people in the village are, and it just hurts so much to watch that. And I think those scenes in the middle of the movie, the second act that just builds this like dread, this horrible feeling you have about it, really work really well. And then I think the build up before the final battle, the final ambush, is very well executed and does go in a different direction than what a lot of the other Vietnam movies do. And I kind of love Vietnam era media. I like playing Vietnam era video games. I love Apocalypse Now. And I think this fits into the wheelhouse very well, and yet it does go in different directions than what other pieces do.
Just a quick thing hitting on, like you said, the nameless, faceless MVA, they don't feel like a superhuman threat. There's something I noted towards the end of the film. What I kind of noticed something about the Vietnam soldiers is that you don't really notice it while you're watching, but towards the end, I'm like, they haven't won like any battles that they've been in. The film definitely pushes that idea that like, no, America lost this war, and that's said by a character in the film. I can't remember which one said that, but yeah, I think Willem Dafoe said it. He said, we're going to lose this war. We've been kicking people's asses for so many years that it's about time we get our ass kicked. And it really pushes that idea that no, this is a war that America lost, and we're going to show you how these people were corrupted and beaten and just bloodied and died, and they lost their souls, their spirits. And yeah, that in itself, I think the grittiness of the whole war film is probably what Platoon does the best.
It feels very personal to me. It feels much more personal than Apocalypse Now in terms of
Yeah.
how the individuals, and because you have all these different characters. I agree with Abram. There's a lot of characters. It's hard to keep track of. I don't remember all. You see a character die, and I'm like, I knew that guy, but what is his name again?
Yeah.
I still felt that each of the characters' deaths. But like through all these different eyes that we see the war, and then these two factions and like the infighting in the platoon, I felt like it worked for me. I felt like it really worked.
Yep. Same here, honestly. And I think that's the main reason why I ended up connecting to some of those other war films I have seen.
there's a
Hey,
weird
I'm not sure if
tension.
you're back.
Yeah, the audio, my audio cut out for a second, but I think it's fixed. What I was going to say is there's a weird tension evoked by Platoon that I think is where that punch comes from. It doesn't evoke tension or suspense in a way like Rear Window does to make me sound smart, because I've seen Rear Window. But it's this weird, gross tension where I don't think humanizing the Vietnamese forces was the role of the film, because that adds to it. It's this sense that because people who have studied the war know that the Americans were at a fucking enormous disadvantage, and why we did a lot of things we did, cutting down the forests and everything, is because we didn't know the land at all. So there's this sense that there's this shadowy force on these guys who are not well trained, who don't know what they're doing, and it's the way that all these things come to a head, in the way that Oliver Stone directs sequences where you think that they're going to get attacked at any second and then they don't. and it keeps that tension. There's this gross in your gut feeling that you don't know what's going to happen, that you're always under the upper hand with those guys. And I just think that the construction of the film does a lot to help that. So as a visceral experience, I think the film succeeds very strongly.
Yeah, actually, I think that something I did like a lot about this, how editing and the cinematography especially led to the feeling of confusion, of not knowing where you are. Shots are chopping right back and forth. The lighting, you can't really see a lot of things. There are people in the background, like you can't see parts of their faces, and everything just goes. There's music building, there's sounds going on. Sometimes you can't hear what people are saying. And initially I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on because I can't hear what they're saying, but I realized partway through that that's intentional. Like they couldn't hear what each other were saying. They didn't know if the person off in the distance was an enemy or one of their friends. And that feeling of being lost is another reason why this movie connected to me so much, is because, yeah, these guys don't know what they're doing. Some of them are willing to admit that. Some of them are too confident to want to admit that. And the way that they interact with that feeling and not knowing what's around them could be a trap. Someone's legs could be blown off at any moment. Someone could get shot through the head. And especially in the scenes like with them exploring the bunker when they first come upon that, and nothing really happens at first. There's a long segment where just exploring it, but you feel like someone could die at any second. And then, of course, it does come to a head, and an explosion does happen. And then carrying that through, that loss and that power through to their frustration in the village scene, where they just want to let off some steam in the worst possible way, with Charlie Sheen's character, who has been pretty personable for most of the movie, treating a disabled Vietnamese person like absolute crap, shooting the ground around his feet. Like all of that is just so intentionally powerful that I was floored for a lot of that in a way that I usually am in war movies. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of what we're saying, I just want to circle back to it, can be attributed to Oliver Stone's time serving in Vietnam.
Yeah.
The confusion of the battle scenes, the sort of the wearing down of the general morale of the troops. I think that's something that he has firsthand experience in. He's seen it during his time there. So just kind of the same way that we talked about with the Hurt Locker, and how important that experience is for like the camera crew. I think you said were wartime photographers and videographers. That experience is really something that you can't give up if you're making a film like that.
I agree.
I think it shows. I think these battle scenes are just like, they're insane. They're great. They are somewhat delightful to watch in a grotesque and horrified way.
Yeah, just because of how impactful the filmmaking is. Holy shit, there's so much effects going on right now, and the people dodging and things exploding, and they built mud pillars for people to hide behind and bits to shoot off of, and people's makeup being so grotesque and powerful. I don't know. It was just, there was a lot of production value in it that I really ended up.
Oh, no, you brought up makeup. I just want to say Tom Berenger's like scarring makeup,
Ooh,
primo
great.
stuff,
very
great
good,
stuff.
very scary.
This adds to his already intimidating performance.
One thing that I wanted to mention, speaking of Tom Berenger and his relationship to Elias, one of, I think, the best and most confused parts of the film is Elias's almost operatic death sequence.
Yeah.
And I think that there is a more interesting film in Platoon, this almost like stage play-esque relationship between Tom Berenger's character, who they describe as being like above death, who has been shot to shit and he's still here, and this crazy sequence where you see Elias having been shot in the stomach already running. And there's this great emotional moment, and the score is phenomenal, by the way. But there's I think a more interesting film, I think, hidden underneath here that gets lost in these more gritty traditional war trappings. So I felt the punch, but I also felt glimpses of something that could have been a little bit more interesting, at least from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's the focus that I was talking about earlier. If it had really focused on fleshing out both of their characters and sort of making you feel like, oh, hey, I don't really know who to side with, and that's the confusion of war, and both of these guys had their history and have been corrupted and had their experiences, I think that really would have been very cool. I personally did not like the death sequence for Elias. To intentionally emotional, and I did feel that a lot of the sequences that push their emotion through grotesqueness and through just the sheer power of war, and I felt the filmmaking take over in that sequence where there is slow motion and the score is going, which you don't really notice the score. And from my perspective, didn't really notice a lot of the score in the other sequences because it was so focused on the visuals. But that scene I felt a little bit too cliche, and on top of that, the ending monologue from Chris Taylor just, yeah, war changed me. It's going to stick with me forever. Just way too cliche for me. And that ended the movie on just come on, seriously? Like you were doing so well and you had to go and do that. And that was a downer for me.
We've talked about the score a little bit. I just want to throw in my 2 cents. I didn't quite like the score that much. I felt there was one piece and they just played it over and over again. And there was
like Lawrence of Arabia.
Not like Lawrence of Arabia. And so it just wasn't, I was like, yeah, okay, well, scores here, okay, time to feel something. That was how I felt about it. But I felt like because it wasn't very prevalent in the rest of the movie, it didn't show up very much, that it didn't become a big detractor. You know, it was just there when it was, and most of the time it wasn't, so that's good.
Yeah.
I mean, I really liked it. I thought its sparing use was very effective, and perhaps I'm more of a. I teared up at the end of fucking Spider-Man Miles Morales last night, so maybe it was an off day in general for feeling emotions in the correct avenues. But I found that it actually elevated the sequences it was used in, and I think because it was used more sparingly, it felt more tasteful and felt more important. And I don't know, I also just like scores from that era. That even if it is one track, it's a good track. So I found it was used effectively.
But you know what they didn't use? You know what cliche they didn't use? No traditional Vietnam, Creedence Clearwater Revival era music. None of that. They didn't.
No popular music of the era.
Yeah, that's the cliche to fall into for Vietnam era media, and they didn't do it. And it didn't suffer because of it. Or there was like one in the bunker scene, but it was, diegetic music, so it made sense.
Yeah.
It's like it's in the scene, so you got to use it.
I really like those bunker sequences, by the way.
They were fun. That was a great break.
And they worked because it was not the entire platoon. It was mostly the characters that you cared about, and then a few side characters that you had, like, oh, that's the guy who's a little like crazy and off a little bit. Who the same guy at the end who like raises his gun and like a stick in the air when Charlie Sheen's flying away in the helicopter.
Yeah,
and he ended up looking like who was it that I said?
Who did you say he looked like?
Nicolas Cage. He looked like Nicolas Cage.
Yeah.
Eyes. I'm like, what the fuck? That looks like Nicolas Cage. Weird aside, but yeah.
Okay. But I guess I think my just general thoughts on the movie, because I'm going to keep hitting back on this in any case, is that it executes well on the basics, like the battle scenes. But I think, like we said with the score can be a little basic and a manipulative. Like, oh, I get it. We're supposed to feel something as Willem Dafoe is dying.
Yeah.
The theme, like the thematic meaning of the film, is a little too saccharine, a little too earnest for my taste. Yeah, it's hammered home in the narration a little bit too much. Charlie Sheen is a fine lead actor. I feel like, Willem Dafoe is a more experienced actor, especially now that we've seen more of his work, and not Charlie Sheen. Those better actors just feel tertiary because they are like Willem Dafoe and Tom Berenger. They sort of overshot. They feel like they should be the focus of the movie, but they're not, and we kind of get the underwhelming performance from Charlie Sheen. So yeah, it hits the basics very well, but it underwhelms me in a lot of other areas.
I think
any other closing thoughts from anyone else?
I will add that I think Abram really hits the nail on the head with the hammer, that that the film is extraordinarily visceral. It's like, cool. The viscerality of it. Yeah. If viscerality is a word, which it is, I declare, this movie is the definition of it. I mean, even if you don't feel the connection with the characters, you feel their actions. And the actions that matter in the movie are done very well and just play to this image and this horrifying feeling of Vietnam that makes I can the themes and stuff, but I come away with maybe a different idea than the movie you can read it many different ways, I think. And while the movie, like tells you what to think about the theme and stuff, it still, I can come away with my own interpretation of how the war was. What was it like? What horrors did they face? What horrors did the soldiers commit? And that's a big plus for me in my mind.
Okay.
I unfortunately did not write down what it was nominated for /
Oh, so we don't have any
movie this morning.
Oops. Well,
Yeah, so I don't have that context, unfortunately. That's too bad. But I could come back with it next week, but I think at that point it'd be too late.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, so it's time to rank. You guys have the number written down on your pieces of paper. I have my Sharpie here. I'm getting ready to write it down. I'm looking at our list over here on the side. I have to make my decision because I've been waffling. I don't exactly know.
I was waffling until before we recorded, maybe minutes before I wrote my number down. So I was right there with you.
I was waffling in the middle of it, and then I realized that I should have just gone gut. But I'm ready. Let's not prolong this too much. Come on, Timo. Chop chop. This is your show.
Number has been written. Are you ready?
Yes.
Tanner's right on your hand, you motherfucker.
I put it on my hand.
3, 2, 1, show it. So
Christ. Okay.
So I wrote 4, Tanner wrote 7, Tucker wrote 5, and Abram wrote 6. I was waffling between 4 and 5, and at the last second, I decided to put it at 4. But because we should start at the bottom, Tanner, give us your spiel. I think we've heard a lot of it already, but you think
I heard I was gonna go with 6, but then I would look at, because number 6 is currently the French Connection. I think the French Connection just does some more interesting things with cinematography than this film does. None of the shots really particularly did anything for me. It was all pretty basic war film stuff. Like I said before, fulfills the basics. Underwhelms me in a lot of the areas that it tried to hammer home.
Okay, then. Well, Abram, you had it at 6? Oh, we can't hear you,
nope,
Abram.
Muted again.
So, Tucker, well, what do you I might revise mine. You and me, we can coalesce at 5. I'll move down to 5 because at least you and me, we gotta debate these other fools about what's going on. But I think The Hurt Locker is a little bit more interesting in style. It's more stylized, and that's why I like the style of Hurt Locker as a war movie. We can compare the two of them more directly than maybe some of these others. Okay, Abram, thoughts?
Like I said, I think that watching the film as an experience and as a narrative are very different. I think the experience of Platoon is much stronger, but I'm looking for more than just the punch. I'm looking for what's behind it. And while I think that a lot of the thematic elements open up a lot of interesting conversation, for me, the more nuts and bolts characters, plot lines, structure didn't connect with me. Perhaps it's because that spectacle is too strong, or I think because the other things are more middling. And I just don't think that coalesces in a film that gets up into the higher ranks. Like, I'd be putting this at number 5. We have The Godfather Part 2.
Yeah.
And that's a film that has spectacle, and it's stapled to really compelling fundamentals. And I just don't think that the spectacle here is stapled to as strong of a movie in Platoon.
So then, I feel a little convinced. Maybe I just thought of it too highly because I like Vietnam War stuff.
I mean, that's important to carry in.
It is. I could agree with a 6th placement.
Sure. And I can concede mine. Don't really need to give a long spiel for myself. Honestly, most of my placement goes for how much more this film impacted me and connected with me than Godfather Part 2, a film that I like more than the first one, which means that the number 1 place irks me just a tad. But I do feel like this has a much more compelling character roster than Godfather Part 2, in my opinion. The setting.
That's a big call.
That's a take.
I'm just going for it. The themes, I don't know. The entire thing was a lot more impactful for me than anything that Godfather Part 2 did. And I can't, in any good judgment, put it below it. So,
okay.
But I do have to concede, because I do think with Timo's concession down 2 whole spots, that's pretty meaty there. But I think that means that we have to put it at number 6.
We have 3 agreements, and well, with some moving around, there we go. I guess that's where it ends up. The movie Platoon from 1986
86.
now sits at number 6, sandwiched between The Godfather Part 2 at number 5 and French Connection at number 7. And now is the moment you have all been waiting for. It is time to do some figuring, some decisions, not by us, but by the gods of random chance. It's time. I just shuffled it. It's time to go and hit up the random number spinning wheel. Okay.
Oh my god, we can see it.
And there we go.
This
Whoa,
is where
my
technology
God.
has taken us.
Oh.
PS5, Xbox Series X, the spin wheel.
Number
7.
7.
A new
Oh,
movie.
interesting. All
Number
right,
7.
another. This is another war movie, technically.
Technically.
Okay.
Actually, no, it's not. Never mind. Argo. Ben Affleck.
Oh, okay.
I mean, it takes place and there's a conflict. Fuck.
Yeah.
Maybe I misrepresented that, but that was a movie I actually watched recently. So I'm not particularly amped to rewatch it. But what's everyone's experience with Argo?
Never seen it.
I have seen it. I am one of the few people that loves Ben Affleck's direction.
Ah.
I'm a big fan of The Town. I'm a big fan of Live by Night, and I am a
Oh,
fucking
he dir-
large fan of
He
Argo.
directed The Town?
Yes, he
Ooh.
did.
Oh no. Well, we'll see. We'll see.
Timo?
So, I've never seen Argo.
Okay.
Yeah, from 2012. That's going to be
Yes.
interesting. We will have to come back to you with our thoughts on where that places, but this was a good discussion, a good movie. I thought is fun to
Yeah.
watch, sort of in a weird way, enjoyable maybe. I don't know. It's hard to be like, yeah, like engrossed in this movie, but it shows me some terrifying things. Great discussion, guys. I really enjoyed it. I had a good time. We will be back next week talking about Argo from 2012, Ben Affleck. Sort of a war movie, right? It's about Iran somehow.
Yeah.
Something.
Well, cool.
Yeah, you'll see.
We'll see. We'll see. All right. So long. We'll be back next week. Peace.
Welcome the new character to the Arms game. There's a new map in the Splatoon 2 game. No. This is a good
Just-
moment, actually.
Arms game.
Arms.
Just Animal Crossing New Horizons game. The Animal Crossing New Horizons.
The Arms.
The Arms.
Introducing a new character for The Arms.
How is there not a game mode in Arms called Arms Race?
I feel like that might be a bit problematic.
Incendiary?
Probably
Yeah.
for the same reason there's not a multiplayer round in Mario called Race War.
War crimes. War crimes.
Don't say that. I hate you. Fuck you and die.